This is Booking It to Financial Freedom, show number 27.
It just feels more and more that people say they're going to do something and then don't follow through. And I don't understand that.
That is the kind of a pitfall in a lot of things, either organizationally or individually. Communication is key. We think that we've clearly communicated our ideas, but in the end, it's just like the telephone game, right? But a lot of times it doesn't even make it around the circle. It's completely bad communication to start with.
And so much of that, I think, has to do with technology. If we're not talking face to face or even on the phone where you can hear inflection or pause for a minute to ask that person if they understand, you're shooting texts, you're shooting emails, and you just assume they understand.
Once you have a grasp on it and they realize that you do, they're going to be far more open into listening to your perspective.
Welcome to Booking It to Financial Freedom, where we explore literature from some of the most successful experts in their field to help you build a blueprint for personal growth and financial freedom. Join us as we examine a new book every month and break down key concepts that help you get out of the rat race and on track to start building a life better than you ever imagined.
Hey everyone, I'm your host, Amanda Schneider, realtor and investor, and I'm here with my co-host and teammate, Jamie Booth. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Amanda, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Less facial hair this time.
Yeah, you shaved the mustache.
I think over the last 3 or 4 episodes, there's been less and less facial hair.
Yeah.
Now I finally took it all off, but
I'm sure your wife is happy.
Oh, yeah. It was fun teasing her with the mustache for a little while, though.
That's awesome. And so this weekend, you guys were in Glenwood?
We went to one of our favorite places. Unfortunately, it wasn't for the, it wasn't for the best reasons. So we went to Glenwood Canyon out west. It's about a 3-hour drive from here. It's one of our favorite places in Colorado to go. Absolutely beautiful drive out. They have one of the biggest hot springs in the world there as far as a pool goes. But we normally go out. We have some friends that live out there, but for this time we were basically executing her father's last wishes was to spread his ashes out there
cool.
in that area. So.
Yeah. That's a great place.
But then we still have really good friends, so afterwards we were able to take advantage of that, and we went riding in the mountains with the razor and all that good stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So for people that don't live in Colorado, and maybe you've never been here, there's a lot of hot springs around here.
Oh yeah,
tons of them. I
was actually complaining to Jen while we were out there. I was like, why do they call it Colorado Springs when there's no springs? I'm sure maybe there used to be, but there's no cool, when you say springs in Colorado, when you say springs in Colorado, you think of places like, Glenwood Springs or some of the other hot springs that are really popular attractions. So there's just so many places called springs in Colorado. It's not even funny.
You're blowing my mind now. Why the city is named that? I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And I see that your tan is greatly improving because you've been spending so much time outside.
Yep.
Doing some training with tennis and all that stuff.
Yeah. So last week I was saying that I was undefeated in singles and I finally got beat.
That sucks.
But it's good for me. It was a lesson in I did not play my normal self. I was very nervous about this match because it was like an inner team match. So I play for the country club here and we have 2 teams, so it was against them. And in tennis, you play one singles line, which was what I was playing, in 2 doubles lines. So it was kind of this whole hoopla of the 2 best singles players are playing each other. And I just let the pressure get to me, and I played like poo. I wasn't hitting like I normally do.
You let the pressure get to you, and you didn't visualize.
I didn't visualize. You're right. Well, my coach always says that you should have a performance goal, and it can't be winning. Your goal can't be winning. It has to be, I'm working on my forehand. I'm going to go up to the net more, that kind of stuff. And my only goal was to win, and that's why I lost. But we're going to talk a little bit about win-win here on this episode, and that definitely was not a win-win. And there's obviously situations where it's not always win-win.
We can't always win, though, can we?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last week we talked about habits 2 and 3. So obviously there's 7 habits in this book, and we are covering 4 and 5 today, but we just kind of quickly wanted to go over 2 and 3 to remind our listeners, because each habit does build upon itself. So habit 2 was begin with the end in mind. So just having a clear understanding of your destination and designing your own future rather than allowing your future to happen by default and just reacting to what other people bring into your life. Having a clear center from which we are establishing our life and our goals, and just being able to kind of focus on that and not let others dictate where we are going in life.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we also covered habit 3, which is put first things first. This basically boils down to the fact that you have to weed through the most important parts of your day. Like, you have to prioritize stuff. We've talked about this in many different formats so far, even though we're only on 27, but this tends to pop up quite a lot. The 80-20 rule, knocking out what the most important things are for whatever piece of your life that you're tending to at that moment, whether it be work, family, your personal goals or whatever. You have to identify what is most important that particular day that you need to accomplish. So, and then being aware, I think being aware is probably the most important thing, is what quadrant some of those tasks fall into.
Yes.
Are they the most important things right now? Are they in quadrant 2, which is our what was it?
Important but not urgent, I think.
Important but not urgent, but they reap the most benefit in the long run as far as preparation and all that stuff. They make the rest of your life a lot easier, and it helps you deviate from all of those emergency situations. So the work up front in the quadrant 2 tends to lead to less personal emergencies or work emergency and stuff, because you're tending to all the stuff up front. So it helps you stay in that harmony of mostly being able to dictate what you're doing that day. So,
which I think is honestly the hardest thing to do. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more, because it's staying in quadrant 2 is basically the essence of habit 7, the very last one. So we will chat about that when we get to that point. But
yes,
one thing I find so interesting is when you and I picked the 12 books for this year, it was really kind of random. Like, it was books that you and I had read, and we felt like we put them somewhat in an order that they would build upon each other. But it is crazy. We're in book 7, how much they build on each other and how many themes are just the same throughout. It just shows you that there is a blueprint for success.
Yeah. Particularly habit 7. When I was reviewing it this morning, I was just we'll get to that next week, but just how profoundly it ties into one of the other books that we covered and all that stuff. So it's pretty neat to see, but it's also it reinforces all these ideas. So you might read one random book and you get a lot of aha light bulb moments, and then once you start reading more and more of these books, you just see how well meshed all these ideas are, and how true that they are in the end. It's just confirmation that a lot of the stuff that we cover is very sound.
Yep.
Advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to get into habit 4, and before we do that, the author makes kind of a distinction of how habits 1 through 3 are kind of more of your private victories. So it's a lot of working on yourself and how you approach things. And then as we get into habit 4, it's really our relationship with other people and how we interact with them. And so before he goes into habit 4, he talks about the importance of making what he calls deposits into an emotional bank account. So just like we would put, money into an account so that it could continue to grow and sustain our lifestyle, we also need to do that with an emotional bank account. So he talks about 6 major deposits that we need to make. And the first one is really understanding the individual. And he's going to go into depth with each of these, which is something we talked about last week, how in depth he goes with everything. But this is basically just empathizing with others and listening before you are responding. So really listening to that person before you are coming up with a
and we'll
response.
talk more about that in habit 5.
Yep. And then keeping commitments. This is crucial. I don't know if I'm just getting old and I'm one of those people who's like, the generation nowadays, but it just feels more and more that people say they're going to do something and then don't follow through. And I don't understand that. That is something like I absolutely live by that. If I commit to you, like, unless I get in a car accident, I'm probably going to, which I have.
Unfortunately, more than once here recently.
Yeah. I'm going to fulfill my commitments, or I'm going to make every effort to make it, or let you know if I can't. So very important to fulfill those commitments. And then clarifying expectations. So just communicating clearly, making sure that you're preventing any misunderstanding or disappointment. The fourth one is showing personal integrity. So just staying true to your values, which is another theme we continue to hear him say, is developing a set of values and sticking to them.
Yeah, sticking to your personal mission statement.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and the clarification of expectations, that's huge. I mean, that is the kind of a pitfall in a lot of things, either organizationally or individually. Communication is key. and a lot of us are really bad at it and have to work at it.
Yes.
So we think that we've clearly communicated our ideas, but in the end, you know, it's just like the telephone game, right? You know, but a lot of times it doesn't even make it around the circle. It's just completely bad communication to start with, and then we have expectations, and then
Yes.
those expectations aren't made, and then we get really mad.
And so much of that, I think, has to do with technology. If we're not talking face-to-face or even on the phone where you can hear inflection or pause for a minute to ask that person if they understand, you're shooting texts, you're shooting emails, and you just assume they understand. And
Yeah.
they might have a completely different understanding of what you want.
Yep, and he actually talks about this later on in the book. Probably we might talk about it briefly in the last episode, but how electronic communication can cause a lot of problems because you can't, because a lot, you know, majority of our communication is eye contact, our facial expressions, all that stuff. And if you're purely trying to communicate electronically, a lot of times those your points,
The subtleties, yeah.
are not coming through and can be completely misinterpreted. So the importance of face-to-face or even a phone call, you know,
Yes.
because there's a lot to be had out of a phone call as opposed to a text as well.
Yes. And kind of piggybacking off of that is apologizing sincerely for mistakes and just taking responsibility. This is huge because, again, I feel like that has started to lack a little bit in society, is truly just taking responsibility. And part of that, in my opinion, is picking up the phone and sincerely apologizing. You know, it's whatever the situation is, it's not sending a text of like, I'm sorry I did this. It's calling and truly taking responsibility for something.
Yeah, and again, I think this a lot goes back to the electronic communication,
Right.
because I don't know, we could talk about that for ages. It's, you know, when you don't have to face someone face to face, it's a lot easier to take some weird stance that you wouldn't normally when you have to actually have an interpersonal
Yes,
experience with that person. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of this goes back to technology again.
I agree. And then the last one is just making small gestures of kindness and courtesy. This is huge. I mean, if I'm walking into a store and somebody's in front of me and they don't even look back to see if I'm behind them or someone's behind them, and then they just let the door slam in my face, like that kind of stuff is huge. Just showing courtesy for others, you know, saying nice things to people, even greeting people on the street when you pass them.
Yeah,
It all
it's
makes a
a
difference.
more and more becoming an old school mentality.
It
You
is.
know, I always open doors where people will hold the doors, all that good stuff. So, but more and more people today in society, they just want to hide in their little bubble and pretend that no one else is around. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's just the way things are going.
I do love Colorado. I feel like for the most part, especially when you're out on the trail and stuff, people are always very friendly and saying hi. It literally makes my day. It's awkward to me to pass someone and not at least say good morning.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Just put the blinders on and
Right.
pretend they're not there.
Yeah. Or if they
Don't
have
make eye contact.
if they
don't
have a
make eye
dog,
contact.
I just usually go and pet the dog and don't say anything to them.
Yeah.
Okay, so then habit 4. This is a really good one. So this one is think win-win. So, you know, instead of I win, you lose, you lose, I win, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This is truly about finding a mutual solution that both of us are happy with.
Yeah, and the author digs really deep into these different concepts. He had, 6 or 7?
I think so, yeah.
Different mentality approaches. Basically, what it is an approach to like a transaction or an interaction. It doesn't necessarily have to be a business dealing. It could be just a personal something that you're trying to accomplish with your spouse or whatnot. So, I mean, all of these kind of correlate to almost every human interaction that you have for the most part. But he goes in to break down what's the difference between a win-lose, a win-win, lose-win, lose-win, you know, all this other stuff.
lose-lose,
Yeah,
everything.
lose-lose.
Yeah.
And essentially it basically means, like, take for instance, someone who is a win-lose type. So this is in this particular example, this would be like you are going to get what you want regardless of what the outcome for the other. So the other person is the lose, you're the win.
Yep.
So you put a hard stance and say, let's just, you know, say it's a sale of whatever product, and you're trying to broker, you know, this deal with this other person, and basically all you care about is winning. And if they feel like they walk away from the transaction losing, that's okay with you because that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
With a win-win, everybody walks away feeling that they got something out of the interaction, whether it be, you know, financially or personally, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the lose-win, which is basically the example he gives in the book is like you are basically sacrificing something personally so that the other person can have the win. So that could be, say you had something planned for the weekend and your wife wants to go do something and you're like, I guess,
Yes.
I'll take that loss so my wife wins, and she feels happy.
Right.
And we don't always want to do that, but it's very valuable to do in certain circumstances. So
yeah, no, I think that's a great way to explain it. He does give the example of a company that he was mentoring, basically, and the boss was complaining about all of his team members were selfish. And so Stephen Covey sits in on a meeting and, he asked the boss, well, what's the prize for not cooperating? And the boss is like, what do you mean? I always encourage everyone to cooperate. But then as Stephen Covey's sitting in through this meeting, the guy's talking about cooperation and we all need to work together. And then he pulls this curtain back and he's like, okay, who's going to win the trip to Bermuda?
Yeah.
And it's like right there, he's setting this mentality of only one person can win this trip. So it's, it's a win-lose situation. One person wins, everyone else loses. So just kind of being aware of how we're presenting things, because a lot of this can be unintentional. I don't think a lot of times we mean to set it out like that, especially I would imagine as parents. A lot of times it's like, you do this or else, instead of how can I, work with my kid to keep his room clean, that it's a win-win for everyone, that type of thing.
kind of goes back to the example he used earlier in the book with when he was teaching his son how to maintain the lawn.
Yes.
Right. He got the outcome he wanted, but he gave his son ownership over the whole process. So
Yep.
kind of that type of situation where, yeah, he got the yard clean, but the son also felt rewarded because he was accomplishing stuff. He was holding himself accountability and all that good stuff. So
And he was proud of the outcome.
yes.
So you and I were chatting about how in an ideal world, real estate buying and selling would be win-win, because obviously one person is selling, hopefully making money on their property. The other person is buying a house they want to live in. And that's how you and I try to approach it, but it doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately. And we were chatting about how, a year and a half ago, especially when the market was really hot and it was a seller's market, buyers were constantly kind of in a lose-win situation where they had to give up a lot.
They were definitely in a lose-lose situation because they not only were they making offers against 15 other people, but they were just going into the process knowing that if they didn't offer $50,000 or more, $100, sometimes $1,000 over asking price, they just weren't going to get it. So it was like,
tough.
Yeah, wouldn't necessarily a complete lose because basically, if you were the one that got the house under contract, you won in a way, but you were definitely getting the short end of the stick from the financial standpoint.
Yeah, and being in that, working in that market, it was really hard because even though I totally get it's a seller's market, like they kind of have a control over the situation. In my mindset, we should always work together to make sure that both sides are happy. That doesn't mean that one side gets everything and the other one has to give it up. It's truly, what can we do so that both sides are happy, no matter what the market looks like? Because it's the biggest purchase that a lot of people will make in their life and one of the biggest sales that most people will make in their life. So sometimes it can be difficult to work with the agent on the other side, that they understand that too, especially when we're trying to negotiate inspection items. That's the biggest thing that most people feel like if a seller agrees to fix something that they've lost because they agree to do that.
Yeah, I always approach that every time I have a client and I'm approaching another agent and a seller or buyer. I'm always going in with the mentality that I want everybody to walk away feeling good about the transaction, because at the end of the day, especially in a more buyers friendly market like we are, and it's easier to broker deals, these transactions with, like you said before. It was like either take it or you walked away. So being in the environment we are now, and the buyers being able to negotiate, we can kind of come into those negotiations with that in mind. And it's a lot better feeling for everybody when you walk away and everyone feels like they didn't get short. Because at the end of the day, especially in real estate sales right now in our environment, unless it's crazy like stuff that we saw last year and whatever, if one side of the transaction feels like they're getting really short ended, the deal's not going to happen. So it's just, you gotta at least try to approach from a win-win perspective.
And see, I think those are the times that it's truly important that you stick to your values, what Stephen Covey is talking about. So no matter who kind of has maybe the upper edge in the situation, understanding that it's just like an ethical thing to make sure, a buyer gets a house with all the items working and, a good solid house, that type of stuff. So again, just sticking to those values, it was hard for me last year when we were representing some of those buyers that were getting shafted, because it's like, don't you understand this is a basic thing that everyone wants? So yeah. Anyway, and part of that, which totally ties into it, is the scarcity and abundance mentality. And so a lot of times when people are in situations where it's like, you have to lose in order for me to win, it's because they have that scarcity mentality. Like, there's not enough for everyone. I have to be the top dog. But really, you need to adapt that mindset of abundance, that there truly is enough for everyone. And that's something, again, not to keep using real estate examples, but I think we've got close to 5,000 real estate agents in the city. And so it's super easy to have the mentality of like, I don't ever want to collaborate with other agents. I don't want to know what they're doing. I want to keep all of my stuff completely secret. But no, adapting the mentality of there's enough business for everyone. Let's collaborate. Like, what are you doing for marketing? How do you do your open houses? Working together, rather than...
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I don't know if it was in this section, there's a little example in the book where someone, they were selling a book similar to somebody else that was like on the Amazon store or whatever. So actually, I think it is in a different section. But anyway, so instead of saying, oh, like that other person's book is like leaving them bad reviews, saying that book is horrible and trying to keep people away from it and only exposing them to your book.
Right.
Instead of taking that mentality, he shared the book because of the different information that was in it. And then it led the other guy to share his book. So it was like a win-win situation because both of them got more exposure than what they would have had they just tried to push the other person out and rat hole them as opposed to working together. So
yeah, it's when we were talking about C.S. Lewis and the Lord of the the other author whose name is escaping me. But anyway, how they...
J.R.R. Tolkien.
There you go. There
did
you
Lord
go.
of the Rings, yes.
Lord of the Rings, not of the Flies. But same thing with them. They could have totally just been enemies and not worked together, but instead they were friends and they supported each other. And they are two of the best well-known authors of all time.
Yeah, and I think another problem with the scarcity mentality is a lot of times you'll fall in and you'll put yourself in the lose-win category, where if you think, you're just constantly sacrificing, letting people, and I think the author even says, like basically using you as a doormat or whatever, right? You sacrifice so much to just try to appease everybody else. It's not a good position to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's a big advocate of win-win or no deal. Let's work together to find out a solution. And if we can't, then there just is no deal. Then we move on from the deal.
Yeah. I think a lot of that's going into the negotiation or whatever it is. Again, this could easily be tied to business, but, personal, interpersonal relationships too. If you can't come to a knowing that if you can't come to a compromise, then we're just going to walk away.
Yes.
There's no, bad feelings or whatever. He uses a couple business examples in the book where, basically you can't broker the deal. If I can't win and you can't win, then we just kind of walk away and forget about it.
This is definitely one of my favorite chapters. So if you are someone that's starting to get a little bit, there's so much information in this book, definitely listen to this chapter because he gives so many great examples of what he means. And so much language to copy and to use and to be completely upfront, no matter what the situation is, sitting down and being like, we don't agree on this situation. Do you agree that we can sit down and talk through this and try to find a solution that's beneficial to both of us? So being totally open about that and just asking the other person for help. He gives an example in here about just language to use. So instead of saying, I need this project done by tomorrow, no matter what, say, I understand that we have a tight deadline for this project. Let's brainstorm together to find a way to meet the deadline and ensure quality work. How can we work together to make this happen? So really keeping it open-ended and showing the other person that you're asking for their help. I really like the example that Sean Covey gives at the end of this chapter, and he talks about how they had had developed some type of proprietary software, sold it to this other company. They felt like they weren't using it correctly. Whatever it was, it resulted in a lawsuit eventually. And Sean Covey was like, want this to result in a lawsuit. We seem to both not be understanding each other. So he literally sat down with the owner of the other company and they worked through it. They whiteboarded all of their thoughts, asked, each other what they thought about it, repeated back to the other person. Okay, so this is what I'm hearing you say, which is super important because even though you think you're listening, you might not always be understanding what that person says.
Yeah. That was a really good example. And I think that kind of ties into the next habit, but, so, I mean, both parties thought they were right and they were taking their stance. They were about to go into, both of them were looking at spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawsuit, but being able to understand each other, at the end saved them, and they continued to work together. So it was like, it was going to completely fall apart. It was going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and they were going to completely, be separated for any kind of future dealings. But by being able to sit down, work through it, they not only did they save the deal, but they stayed together. They still have a working relationship and all that stuff. So it's very important. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things in a win-win is being open to being somewhat vulnerable and truly just saying, I don't have all the answers. Let's work on this together.
Yeah. And he goes to talk about some key principles to take into a win-win, to approach the win-win and put it into practice. And the first one is seek mutual benefit. Obviously, you both want to, again, feel like you've won something. Collaborate and cooperate rather than approaching situations with a competitive mindset. Come into it thinking being open to the fact that both sides can actually win.
Yeah, and you might have a different opinion than I do, but I'm open to listening to it.
Yep, and then integrity and trustworthiness. Acting with integrity, keeping true to your personal statements, holding yourself to honesty.
Yep.
And then following through with your commitments, like we talked about earlier.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then we already talked about the win-win language, how important it is, the way that you communicate with the other person.
Yeah, it means a lot. Almost means like most of it.
I agree.
Yeah, I think though, if you try to sit down and negotiate anything with whether it's your wife, your kid, or a business associate, if you're coming with a really nasty attitude, you're never going to be able to communicate effectively with that person. So you have to be really cognizant of how you're delivering your thoughts.
Yeah, with just a few words, you can make the other person immediately shut down, and that's not what you want.
Or me sitting up here giving you dirty looks through this entire podcast.
That's right. Classic Jamie. Okay, habit 5.
I can't help it, though.
Habit 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. This is super hard, I think, and it's hard for any of us, even you and I, when we're in this podcast, because it truly means that I need to listen to you and let you finish your thought rather than being in my own brain thinking how I'm going to respond to you. I need to truly be listening to what you're saying to have an appropriate, well thought out response.
And I think he even says this is by far the hardest habit to implement, to not necessarily to understand, but to implement it honestly, because he goes into talking about, how if you're using these techniques of trying to understand the other person, sometimes what did they use a few times in the book? It's if you feel like someone's using a technique on you, right? You're trying to understand them, but if you're not coming across genuinely, they're still not going to give you what you're seeking as far as information goes.
Yes.
This was actually, because we always talk. You and I are both in the military. Any kind of corporate person, they're always going to talk about communication, the importance of communication, active listening. So he was talking. He pointed out the fact that just actively listening, asking questions, and getting feedback. It's basically a lower level of communication. It's better than not listening,
right?
And not letting the person that's talking to you feel like you're engaged, because active listening, you're shaking your head, you're giving verbals, you're asking for feedback, but essentially you're just, like you said, it's a lower level of communication as opposed to understanding what the person is really trying to say. It goes into depth, quite a few different examples in this chapter. One particular one where he's having a conversation with a father's having a conversation with his son, and instead of listening to what the son is saying and trying to understand what he's actually trying to convey, the father keeps terms that he's using.
Yeah, autobiographical response.
Yeah, it's like, the different responses are not necessarily extracting the right information. So the conversation goes completely differently than when the father asks questions that are trying to, like, what do they call it? Understanding or whatever. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah. Total silence here.
No, you're fine. What I was thinking you were talking about was
empathetic listening.
Empathetic.
The difference between empathetic listening as opposed to, just active listening.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought I thought you were going, because this is another thing that people do is the autobiographic responses. So you're telling me a story instead of listening to it. I'm like, oh yeah. Well, when that happened to me, this blah 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 blah. I don't know if everyone saw that, but my dog is here. So if you're watching the video, you just got a glimpse of Jover. But so you don't want to. There might be times that using an autobiographical response is helpful, but most of the time when I'm trying to express my feelings, I don't want to hear about what happened to you. I want you to truly listen to me, and then basically repeat back to me what I said so that I know that you heard what I said. And that's that, empathetic listening that you were talking about. And he talks about how there's different listening continuums. And so we can range from basically kind of like half listening to like, I'm just nodding my head. And so I'm kind of giving you some response, to completely ignoring you, not giving you any response, to somewhat attentive listening. I might be saying yes and but then the empathetic listening is when I'm truly repeating back to you what you're saying to me. So, oh, Jamie, what I heard you say is, you're concerned about blah, 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 blah.
But also trying to understand their feelings and what they're trying to convey too. It's once you start digging into it and the examples and it starts to make sense, it really can become powerful because, especially if we're approaching it from like a transaction standpoint, where, in the example we used earlier, where one side thought they were right and the other side thought that they were right, and they were firm in their belief that they were 100% right. Back to the example you used where they were able to list all of the insights that they have, concerns, why they think, and it all boiled down to understanding what the other person's perspective was. And then by opening that up, that person, the other party feels as though, this person understands me. And once you start opening that, everything starts to turn in a different direction. So what could have been a conflict to begin with, once you start to achieve mutual understanding, then the entire tone of the room completely changes, and then you start working together towards a mutual goal at that point.
Yes.
But before you get to that point of mutual understanding, you can't move forward. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many times when we're communicating, if we're not truly listening, or we're thinking about what's happened to us in the past or how we're going to respond, we're not truly getting the whole story. And so it was the example that you were talking about, where it's the father and the son, and the son's telling the father, I want to quit school. And so in the first, because he uses this example several times and talks about different ways to respond to it. But in the first one, the father's basically like, well, you can't quit school, blah, 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 like immediately just jumps down his throat. Instead of asking a bunch of probing questions, repeating some of what his son says to him back to truly get to the reason. And the true reason is because the son is reading at a 4th grade level and he feels like he's going to flunk school. But you don't get to that unless you are truly listening and asking the right questions.
And because his communication was suppressing it as opposed to bringing it out.
Yes.
In the example, he was saying stuff like, well, you've wasted all this education. Education is the most important thing, all this other stuff. So the communication outcome was completely different than if he was trying to understand where his son was actually going from. Because if you go back and read the book, the outcome of the conversation goes completely two different directions, as opposed to when the father uses empathetic questions as opposed to just kind of the same. It's funny because it's exactly the way like probably 98% of parents would react in that conversation, as opposed to trying to get to the root of the problem. Yeah. So
I actually, again, I'm not a parent, but I love how much he incorporates that into every habit. This habit can be used in both business and personal. And so many times he uses examples of how he's used these habits on his family. And I just think that's great.
Yeah. I don't know how, all these examples that he uses in the book, as far as how, he sets down with his, I don't know. It's that is amazing concept, but I just can't see.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do that, kudos to you guys. Cause
Right.
they sat down, they have family planning, family goals, he was using an example in this where he role plays with his wife.
Yes.
Hard situations that might come up within the family.
Yeah.
That way that they're more prepared in the future if something arises, that's really emotional or complicated. So to better prepare themselves for basically conflict in the future. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. But, when you have a mind like his, I can see where.
Right. If you're Stephen Covey, then it's
incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
He's got such an academically, geared mind.
Yep. And so we've kind of talked about a lot of these, but I just want to make sure we kind of define the different habits. He lists 5 different habits that he feels are important to putting into practice to truly understand the other side. So he talks about listening with intent, which we've already talked about. And so much of that is more than what I'm saying, but the expression on my face, my eye contact, I'm nodding. Again, I'm repeating back some of what you've said so that I truly understand. And this can't be done through text and email, as we've already said. So if it's a hard conversation that you need to have, it needs to be something that you're having in person.
Yeah, and coming across as genuine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I can sit here and fake active listening to you all day long, but you're going to know I'm not interested for real.
Well, I even had this situation yesterday because I have a client under contract and we were negotiating the inspection, and they have 2 little kids, so it's hard to get them on the phone, especially at night. So it was easier for them to text me, but I found that it started to almost get heated. We feel this is important, and I'm trying to tell them, I know you understand this is important, but it's not actually as big of a deal as you think it is, and this is why. And finally, we just got on the phone, and once we got on the phone, it was we completely understood each other. But trying to do that through text, it was almost like they thought I was downplaying their concerns.
Yeah, so. I can definitely see how that would happen.
Yeah. Okay, so the second one is suspending judgment. So, and this is so hard to do, and it just comes with our wiring and how our experiences in life is. It's pretty easy to jump to judging somebody's situation, but trying to just have a clear head when you are having a conversation with somebody and not judging them for what they say, how they come across, et cetera, because you don't know what happened to them this morning or, in their life.
I mean, if you can't not do this, you're never going to get to an empathetic understanding, because if you prejudge something, that's it, unless you change your complete outlook on the situation. But if you can't suspend judgment going into the conversation, then you're not going to get to a mutual understanding.
Yep. And I've said this one a few times now, but reflecting back and validating. Again, most of the time this is done by summarizing their points and paraphrasing back to them what you've heard them say. And then expressing your own perspective. So after you've tried to understand, you're engaging them in a dialogue that then shows that you're open, you're respectful, but this is your point of view.
Mm-hmm. So. And most importantly about this step is that this is after you've got the understanding of the other person.
Yes.
Right? So go through the process of fully understanding the position that the other person is in. And then once you have a grasp on it and they realize that you do, they're going to be far more open into listening to your perspective. Mm-hmm. So
no, that's such a good point. You don't want to be like, okay, well, you said your piece, now I'm going to say mine, because that's not how it works.
Yeah, you got to give them a sense of feeling that you do understand where they're coming from and that you're empathetic for what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of wrap it up, I think one of the most powerful things about habit 5 is that it is completely in your circle of influence. So we talked about that, I think, in the first episode, your circle of influence, which are the things that you have control over, and how you interact with people is completely within your control.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. Yeah. I was actually struggling with this traffic here in Colorado Springs on I-25.
Yes.
Once you get down here towards downtown, it's just so chaotic. And the whole time I was struggling I would get mad and I'm like, Jamie, you have no control over how those people are driving. And I would calm down. And then 30 seconds later, blood pressure back up, and I'm like, it's a constant battle. It's
outside your circle.
It's out. I can't do anything about it. I just take a couple deep breaths. okay, you'll
Yeah.
get to the studio and everything will be fine.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. Cool. I think that about wraps it up. And so we will cover in our last episode for this book, habits 6 and 7, and then we'll be done with this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to the last episode. It's been great so far. So I'm hoping everybody's enjoying the content.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to take us out?
Oh, sure. Yes. So please, as always, if you liked what you hear, you've got value out of it, or if you think somebody else might, please like, subscribe, share on YouTube. And don't forget that we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So please, as always, we continue to, appreciate all the support that we get, all of our listeners out there, and, help spread the word that we're here.
Yeah,
we really
we would love
appreciate
that.
it. Thank you so much, everybody. And we were looking forward to the next episode.
All right. See you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.